So what are the 5 key principles of conscious recovery? Principle number 1, underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that is whole and perfect. This principle is one key that really sets conscious recovery apart from different approaches, modalities, and support groups. So often, a person coming out of an addiction or in recovery is viewed as broken in some way. Many of the support groups intended to help someone break the cycle of their addiction, in many ways unconsciously continue to affirm the brokenness rather than looking for the inherent wholeness. Many clinicians, counselors, therapists are trained to diagnose and treat. And although that is very useful to a point, we are really curious at conscious recovery about this question. What gets created when we look at our clients as broken in some way? And what might get created if we look for the inherent wholeness within them underneath all of the addictive tendencies? The second key principle of conscious recovery is this: the addiction itself has never been the problem, but was a strategy that has lost its effectiveness. Have you ever heard the term coping mechanism? In conscious recovery, we change that to brilliant strategy. And we look at addiction not as the problem for our clients, but as a solution. And when we frame it that way with our clients, what if it was a brilliant strategy at one point? Then we can begin to question that strategy and ask our clients to explore the question, is it still brilliant? Rather than looking at addiction as the problem, when we look at it as a strategy that has lost its effectiveness, first and foremost, it puts the power back in with our client, and they can begin to explore for themselves, is this a strategy that is still working for me, or is there a different way to approach my addiction? And of course, when we look at addiction as the problem, it actually helps keep that problem stuck, our client stuck in the problem, rather than offering them a path to actually begin to look at it in a very different way. When they explore it as a strategy that has lost its effectiveness rather than a problem to be solved, not only is that more empowering for our clients, but it actually can help them begin to own the power of that and start to look at it through a very different lens, not one of shame or blame, but one of openness and curiosity. The third key principle of conscious recovery is treating addiction must go beyond addressing symptoms and get down to the underlying root causes that drive destructive behavior. I've had the honor of working in the addiction treatment field for 12 years, and one thing that I have noticed is clients come back to treatment 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And in my experience, it's because the addiction was being treated, but not the underlying root causes. In other words, clients were coming to treatment, they were getting tools, they were getting strategies so that they could address their addictive behavior, but so often weren't actually getting down to the underlying root causes that actually drive the destructive tendencies. Conscious recovery invites a deeper look, a deeper approach, a possibility and opportunity to actually get down to those underlying root causes so that those can be healed rather than only treated. The fourth key principle of conscious recovery is the root causes of addictive behavior are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. Let me dive a little more deeply into this key principle. We recognize that there are many aspects to both addiction and recovery. We recognize that there is addiction that stems from the physical room, the intellectual room, the emotional room, and the spiritual room. Conscious recovery is really addressing the spiritual room and the emotional room. So when we say the 3 root causes of addiction are unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame, we're really speaking about those 2 rooms. So let's dive into these 3 root causes. Of course, unresolved trauma is a topic that many of us are exploring now. Most treatment now is recognizing that if you don't address a person's trauma, they will end up going back to their addiction and quite possibly relapsing. So trauma in all its different forms is one of the deep root causes that drive addictive tendencies. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't have trauma. I had a really perfect childhood. I myself used to say that. And so being born on planet Earth itself is a traumatic experience. If it's true that we came into the world whole and perfect, how many of us were taught that in kindergarten, in church? How many of us were told you're whole and perfect just the way you are? You're an infinite spiritual being. So many of us have subtle experiences of trauma. And of course, there are the more obvious traumas: physical abuse, sexual abuse, the loss of a parent or a caregiver. So unresolved trauma is one of the deep root causes of addiction. The second root cause is spiritual disconnection. So what is spiritual disconnection, and what do we mean by spiritual disconnection? It's profoundly simple. We come into this world deeply connected with our true nature, and we come into a world that teaches us in subtle and not so subtle ways that there's something fundamentally wrong with us, rather than being taught that we are inherently whole and perfect. Because of this, we separate from our true nature. We begin to believe lies about ourselves rather than the fundamental truth that we are whole and perfect spiritual beings. The third root cause of addiction is toxic shame. 100% of the clients I have worked with, and certainly it was true in my own journey, there is this sense of brokenness, this belief in their inherent wrongness. So toxic shame is very simple. It's a belief that we are broken in some way. We all have now heard the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is we believe we've done something wrong, and shame is we believe that we are wrong. Walking around with a core belief that we are broken, that we are damaged, that we are unworthy or unlovable is absolutely one of the deep root causes that actually drive addictive tendencies. The fifth key principle of conscious recovery is there is a pathway to permanent freedom through the adoption of spiritual practices and principles. I want to focus for a moment on that permanent freedom piece. How often have clients been told they have a lifelong chronic illness that can never be healed but only treated? The question that I want to ask is, what gets created when we believe that? What gets created within our clients when we tell them that? And what if there is a different possibility? What if there actually is a pathway to permanent freedom? What if we can actually help our clients heal the underlying root causes that actually drive the addictive tendencies? This is the key importance of the fifth principle of conscious recovery. There is a pathway to permanent freedom through the adoption of spiritual principles and practices.